In today's episode, we're going to talk about everything diversity and inclusion, the challenges that still exist in the space, and what it's finally going to take for us to move the needle ahead. We're also going to explore Theresa's experience and transition from corporate into entrepreneurship and how she is managing it all as a fit mom of two. You do not want to miss this. So, welcome, Theresa. We are here in the beautiful Beso del Sol, which is an organic airbrush studio located in Nutley, New Jersey. This is one of the businesses you opened after running in corporate America for so many years, but we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
First, I want to talk about kind of your story and where you grew up and how you landed in financial services, which is where we met, and we can talk about that later on too. But let's know more about T.
Well, I grew up in the Bronx.
Okay.
Puerto Rican dad, British mother, and which is, rice and beans, fish and chips.
Okay.
Weird combination. But he was in the Air Force and was stationed in England, and that's how he met her. So grew up in the Bronx, and no one in our family had gone to college at that point, and no one definitely was in a professional environment. So you can imagine when I first hit Lehman Brothers, at the time it was Shearson Lehman Brothers, my hair was all wrong, my nails were all wrong, everything was just not what they expected, right? Because they had the, Talbot's little bow on and the bob, and I came in with the big high hair and, like the beach on my nails and, a lot of makeup, and it was different.
You was Bronx.
I was Bronx, and I brought it to Lehman Brothers.
Exactly.
But it was, I think that was my first experience with inclusion.
Yeah.
Right? And feeling what it feels like to be in an environment that you wanted to be in, but you felt so much of an outsider.
Yeah.
And there was not like anywhere that I looked at in that company where I wasn't like, oh my gosh, that's not me. There's no one here that looks anything like me.
Yeah. Which is so funny, because I wonder if you kept that in mind when you first met me, when I interviewed with you at Lehman. So Theresa and I met. She was the head of campus recruiting at the time? Or
I was in operations. I was running operations
You were running operations recruiting, and at the time I was in college, and I was working at a nonprofit called 100 Hispanic Women, which you served on the board of. And Shirley Rodriguez-Romanesky, like second mom of mine, was like, you had to meet with Theresa. Teresa's going to get you an internship at Lehman Brothers.
Yeah.
And I was studying finance at Baruch College, so it made a lot of sense. So I was like, okay, yes, I'm going to meet Theresa. And I sat down and I interviewed with you, and that's how I landed my first internship at Lehman Brothers, which just basically, started my career. So I owe a lot of the woman I am today to you.
Well, thank you.
So that's where we met. So did you think that when you saw me, like, here's another Latina, let me hook her up? Or?
I did want to hug you up, and I still always want to hug you up. But it was... I saw the potential, and it's not your fault or my fault that we hadn't been exposed to what we hadn't been exposed to. It doesn't mean that we couldn't, learn everything and we couldn't be very successful. It's just we'd never been exposed to it, right?
Right.
And there's certain things that you can change, right? You can change the way you dress. You can change the way you do your hair. Not that I think you have to, but you can make those adjustments. What you can't change is, are you a good person? Are you a person that has the drive? Are you a person that wants to succeed, right? So those things I saw in you. All the rest of it, that's kind of, window dressing. You can play around with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you spent most of your career in diversity and inclusion and making sure that organizations were getting the right talent in the door, making sure that they were thinking outside the box and stop trying to be so traditional. So can you talk to me a little bit about that experience and maybe some of the frustrations and challenges that you had as a Latina, as a woman working in diversity and inclusion, which can be a space that, has the intent of doing good and really invoking change, but things just move really slow?
I think my first experience, because how I got into it was I was serving on some of these community boards, like 100 Hispanic Women and Aspira, and I was bringing that into the organization, Lehman Brothers at the time. And then I ran recruiting for operations, but I always had an eye on diversity. So we ended up having the best diversity numbers for campus recruiting at Lehman Brothers, and that's kind of when I caught people's attention. And the biggest frustration for me when I was in, that initial stage of doing diversity recruiting in the campus space was that at the time, and I think we've evolved a lot in companies across, the globe in their thinking around this, at the time it was you go to the Ivies. You go strictly to the Ivies, and you get people in these particular programs. And so every single company, especially on Wall Street, was going to, 7 schools. And the diverse population at those 7 schools were already really small.
Right.
But everyone was doing a feeding frenzy on those, small populations at those 7 schools. And what I was trying to explain at Lehman Brothers and to, other people in recruiting was that when you think about diverse populations, and let's talk about the Latino population, there's going to be a lot of reasons why a student that could have gotten into one of those 7 schools did not attend one of those 7 schools. And they're like, well, why would that be? And I said, first of all, they may be helping in the house, and the family does not want them leaving the house because they're caring for this, younger kids, or they're actually having a part-time job and contributing money. It could be that it's a female and you're not allowed to leave the house and go and stay at a school. It's about debt, right? So if you got 100% ride at Rutgers University versus you're going to have to pay 50% at Harvard, and the parents are saying, wait, you're going to get a degree, you're going to get that piece of paper you want with 0 coming out of pocket, or you're going to have $150,000 worth of it. They don't see the difference in that piece of paper, right? Where on Wall Street it was like, well, why wouldn't you go for the Harvard versus the Rutgers? And how I helped people understand, especially leaders at Lehman Brothers, was I had them talk to some of these kids about the choices they had made and why they made, one school over another. And it came down to money. And, and for some of the women, the family not allowing them to go, and they were just shocked. Because that wasn't their experience, right? It wasn't their kids' experience. It wasn't their neighbor's experience. It was alien to them. And so that was kind of the first, I think, obstacle that I hit, where I had to help educate what was really going on.
So as you continued to progress in your career and become more senior, how did, and I love having this interview with you because I'm getting like some insider information that I don't even know about you. I've known you, like 15 years now. So when you became more senior, how did the politics interfere with some of the work you were trying to do in the D&I space, or did it?
There's always going to be politics. And I think the challenge was when you talk about diversity and inclusion, a lot of times you'll have senior people, even in the C-suite, the CEO say, we're going to be diverse now. We're going to really focus on diversity and inclusion. And then as that trickles down to the middle manager, that's like a producing manager that is trying to hire people, and you're saying, no, you need to look at a diverse slate of candidates. They're like, why are you holding me up? Like, I just want to get this kid from the school I went to that played lacrosse like I did and bring them in.
Right.
And so that message doesn't always trickle down, nor does the reasoning behind it and how it's going to help enhance what you're doing trickles down. So I think, the politics around that, and you being the person that was now educating and advocating to them versus their senior leaders actually holding them accountable. It shouldn't be HR holding you accountable. It should be your leaders holding you accountable. And that's where I would see some disconnect a lot. And then I think the other piece is, when they got diverse individuals in, it was, almost like we invited you into the club, now be like everybody else. And that's not what inclusion is. It's we invited you to the club and we want to, really harness that difference here. A lot of times that's not what was happening. It was we invited you in, now you're in the club, kind of be like everybody else.
Right, so conform. Now that you got in, it's time for you to conform and talk and walk like everybody else.
Yeah, kind of be like the dominant norm.
Right. So I want to get into some of the tea here, right?
Okay.
Let's get into some juice, kind of below the surface kind of stuff. Yeah.
I feel like I'm on
let's get into the juicy details. Did you ever feel that, and I worked on Wall Street, so and across corporate America, so I experienced this myself, so I know how it is, and the biases exist. They just do. Have you ever felt like senior folks would almost snare or lift their nose, like, oh, here comes a Latino woman to talk about diversity and inclusion? Did you ever feel like that?
I think not necessarily it was a Latino woman talking about diversity and inclusion. I think it was, oh my gosh, here's another HR person talking about diversity and inclusion, because I think a lot of times they just did not, the people you were talking to on the other side, the conversation was not helping them understand how it would help them. It was more, your numbers aren't good, you have to do this. And we weren't connecting the dots for them on how this would truly help them. And so, I think that's something that had to be worked on both sides, right? Mm-hmm. You really, really had to show the business case in regards to, hey, if you're in investment management, services, and you don't have people that are going to look like a growing swell of a population that, are attaining wealth, you're going to have a disconnect there, mm-hmm. right? Instead of just saying, hey, you didn't hire, 15% of this, and you're not, in on par with what's available in the workforce, so you're dinged. Mm. Right. So I think what happened with a lot of these efforts is managers felt like it was a dinging exercise versus why is this being done and how is this really helping me?
So another thing I used to think about, as well as my peers, when we talk about having like the head of diversity and inclusion come in and the person that is selected is non-diverse. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts around that? Do you think they can really influence change or can understand what it takes to be truly diverse and operate in an organization that is trying to get you to conform? Or even when we think about inclusiveness.
It's really interesting because you're probably not going to expect this answer from me.
Okay.
I think yes. And the reason why I think that is everyone, like if you really break it down, everyone's diverse based on your socioeconomic background, the experiences you had as a child, where you grew up, who you're surrounded with. And I'll tell you why I think this. So there was a guy that I worked with, a professor at CUNY. Mm-hmm. White guy, amazing, very, very invested in diversity and inclusion. And we actually worked on some projects together and got scholarships for his whole class. And we announced it and they didn't know they were getting it. It was like one of those Oprah moments. It was wonderful, right? But what you didn't know about him, if you looked at him and you said, here's this white guy really involved in diversity and inclusion, is he had an adopted black brother. And that brother was bullied and, ended up getting killed as a young man. And that influences guys like he's married to an African-American woman. His children are biracial. He's got an experience that you wouldn't see just from face value.
So I'm going to challenge you on this because he had an experience which exposed him to mm-hmm. some of the things that diverse folks deal with and have to manage on a daily, and he also had a personal connection to it. So right. So his drive and passion for it is clear. But a lot of the folks that are being selected for these high profile roles don't have that exposure, and they're put in these roles now with no real insight on what we are really tackling and what it really takes to kind of stand out, right? So in those instances, do mm-hmm. you think that someone can be successful in the role and really add value, or does it need to be someone who is non-diverse? And when I say diverse, I mean someone of color, because when you look at the numbers, that's who's suffering, right? That's where the scarcity lies. Who doesn't have that type of experience and never had that type of insight to really come in and run a shop around that?
I do, because I think if you're smart, mm-hmm. right, and you surround yourself with people that are going to give you information on those experiences, you can do a good job. And the reason why I say that is I've never had, or lived in a situation where, it was complete poverty and I couldn't eat or anything like that, right? Mm-hmm. But that doesn't preclude me from being able to work in those arenas and do the best job to help those individuals, right? So I don't think you have
That's a great point.
have to have suffered an experience or had the impact of an experience to be able to be empathetic and understand and add value to it. I think you have to surround yourself with people that are going to give you insight and say, hey, look, that's sounding more like corporate speak around what we're doing. This is the reality of what people are experiencing, mm-hmm. and they have to be open to that.
Okay, so it can't be somebody coming in that is non-diverse and then their whole team is also non-diverse.
I mean, I wouldn't want to see any team non-diverse, correct. Right? Because it's just, then it's just cookie cutter. Everyone's going to have the same mindset, and that's not going to work.
So my last question around D&I as it plays out in corporate, and then I want to explore outside of corporate current climate. why do you think it's taking so long? I mean, there has been progress even from my time on Wall Street to where we are today, but it's just not enough. Like, what is missing? What is it going to take for corporate America to truly absorb the essence behind diversity and really be inclusive? What is it going to take?
I think we're seeing a change in the mindset around diversity and inclusion, where people are putting inclusion now before diversity. And I think that's the answer. Because diversity, you can look at diversity and say, I can check the box, and because I've gotten numbers or significant improvement in numbers of women or, minorities or veterans, and I can say I got those numbers, right? The hard part is then saying, what's going on once those people are here? Is our infrastructure and our systems and our processes, ones that were created years and years ago by a dominant norm? So, leadership profiles, promotional, processes, are those geared towards those people that have always been the dominant norm? Or are we looking and deconstructing those processes and saying, hey, the way that's structured wouldn't really benefit, a woman being looked at for promotion, or wouldn't really help a minority that maybe, didn't always have an experience of automatically being included, right? Because if you think about it, the dominant norm, there is an expectation they're going to be included because they always have been. For minorities, you've had experiences in your life where you didn't feel included. So you have a little bit of skepticism when you go into any organization, like, am I going to be included? So we've got to care for that, right? Because there's one that, of course I'm going to be fine. And then there's others like, ooh, maybe, I don't know, we'll see. And so are we caring for that? Are we thinking about how we operate organizations and the infrastructure, and is that aligning with the numbers we're bringing in? I think that's where the work has to be done.
Okay, I want to pause on that because we might pick up on that a little bit later.
Pause on it.
But I want to talk about outside corporate America and some experiences that people are having that they carry with them to work as a result of just carrying themselves in their personal lives. There was a story you shared with me about your hubby and him traveling through the airport and what he goes through versus what you go through, and sometimes how he prefers you to do something versus him because he knows the outcome is going to be different. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
I mean, it's a different experience, right? And he's always said it to me since we met, that my dad was very light-skinned Puerto Rican, and my husband is darker. And so he said when we first got together that, walking through the airport was so much easier when he was walking through the airport with me because he didn't get stopped as much, or he wasn't always the one singled out. And, I would kind of question that and be like, really, kind of, what are you thinking? And I shared with you one time we were in Mystic, Connecticut, my daughter, son, and Omar, my husband, and our son Javi is darker like Omar is, and Allie's light like me. So Allie and I walked into a store, this little art glass store, and we're looking around, and the guy was behind the counter and was, like, oh, hi girls, and we walked around. And my husband and son were at the Army Navy store getting Army Navy things, and they walked in, and immediately the guy came from behind the counter and was following them through the store. And my daughter was the one that picked up on it. She's like, do you see what's going on? And I was like, yeah, I see it. But it was just right there in your face. It was like we were greeted. The minute they walked in, he walked out and walked behind them. So it was, that's the reality of what people deal with. And it's, maybe the guy had bad experiences in the past, who knows? But to my husband, that's been a constant in his life. Like, we had one of the biggest arguments ever when we were in a neighborhood that I felt wasn't the safest, and I locked the doors. And he was like, how dare you do that? You don't know how many times I was walking by a car and people locked the door. And I was like, whoa, just locking the door, because I thought it was like a little questionable. But he reacted so much to that because he's like, you don't know what that feels like.
Right. So if people are having these experiences outside the office, how can they turn that off when they get into the office and we're trying to push these programs around inclusion?
I don't think you have to turn off that you've had that experience. I think you need to share that.
No, I'm talking about the people who are doing the discrimination. Right?
Well, hopefully you're not working with those people, but I think we have to share those experiences that we've had because they're so alien to some people that are sitting on the opposite side of the table, right? And I think that's where, again, the inclusion piece comes up in, your experience, colleague that has never never not felt included has been vastly different. And let me give you some examples of that. And I think when you talk to intelligent people about what their experience has been, it's kind of an eye-opener for them, where they're like, whoa, like really? That happened to you? But you're a professional. And it's like, it doesn't matter. You know, I'm a professional that always dresses to go through the airport, aka my husband, because if I wear sweatpants and a t-shirt, you know, they look at me like something's off. If you walk through with a t-shirt and sweatpants, they don't kind of like question it, you know. So it's just helping people understand the different experience. And that's not a Latino thing or just African American. That's, as you know, someone that deals with disabilities or someone that is LGBTQ, you know, like we've had different experiences. And for people to really, you know, have diversity and inclusion in their organizations, they need to understand those and, you know, have the empathy to say, wow, you know, it's been vastly different than what my life's been.
Yeah. And if you think about it, I mean, we also need to understand the different experiences. If we think about, you know, our networks or just people that we spend a lot of time with who come from affluent backgrounds, you know, maybe money is the key driver in their family. And so, you know, when it's time for the family to get together, it's always about where are you in your career? How much money are you making? What income are you making? Whereas in minority communities, it may not be that way. It may be more about family, right? Real family, instead of this hierarchy that may exist in more affluent networks.
You know, I'm glad that you brought up our unconscious bias, because, you know, doing this kind of work and the more research I do, like I've had to admit to myself, like, you know, you talk about affluent families, I would have an unconscious bias that, of course, they had an easy life and everything came easy to them, and you know, they probably had a brand new car when they were 16 while I was taking the subway, and in my mind I imagine this fairy tale life that they had because they, you know, grew up in Greenwich or whatever. And the reality is when you talk to these people, that hasn't been the experience. And I look at it with my daughter, who went to a private girls' school, where she has friends that have, you know, gazillion dollars, are rolling up in a Jaguar, you know, at 16, yet these kids are struggling and they're depressed and they have all of these issues. So I think, you know, part of unconscious bias is understanding, like, the grass isn't always greener, and we're making assumptions that, you know, are precluding us from truly understanding each individual that we're interacting with. So I've had to look at that myself.
Yeah, me too.
Because I'm like, hey, you know, how could your life be hard? You like, come on.
Right. Like when we think about, like, when we're in corporate and we're like, oh, pushing through these unconscious biases, and we think everyone non-minority should be the ones taking it, but it's like, no, we all need to take it.
Absolutely.
Because we all have these unconscious biases that we're not even aware of, and it is a result of the experiences that we had and what we've been exposed to.
Exactly.
So I can talk to you about this for hours, because you and I are both very passionate about this, but I want to transition a little bit and talk about the reasoning and why you decided to make the leap from corporate into entrepreneurship and what that experience has been like.
You know, the reasoning actually came from a family reason. Our son had some health issues and I needed to be more flexible. And both of us were traveling a lot, and that doesn't work when you've got to do some stuff with your kid. So I said, okay, you know, I'm not going to not do anything. So I was like, you know what? I always wanted to open up a small business, and I wanted to have that experience because, you know, I love creating things from scratch. So I was like, I want to have the experience of just like building something that never existed. And so that's what I did, and true to, you know, my type A personality, it was supposed to be, you know, just like low key, and I'll be in the town, and of course now I'm on the Chamber of Commerce, I'm part of the Women's Leadership Network, I'm doing consulting, I'm giving the high school like projects on how they could do marketing for the town. So it's been good, but it did allow me the flexibility to be there for my son. And the one thing I realized as I've gotten, you know, more mature in my career and in my life is you just don't get that time back. And so I had to make a decision of, do I keep moving fast forward on the career and hope that this all takes care of itself, right? And kind of like allocate that work out to babysitters, the school, or do I screech the brakes and say, if I don't do this now, you know, it could be bad in 4 years. And so I did, and he's doing well. And so, you know, for me, seeing that kid be really happy was like, yay.
So it's interesting that you say, you know, you needed the flexibility, because starting a small business is not easy. That's a lot of work.
But I could control the hours I was doing it, right? So if I wanted to work late at night when he's already taken care of, I could do that. It was on my schedule, right? So I was organizing it all around what I needed to do with him.
Right.
Right. Where companies are great now. Like, there is flexibility. People work from home and all of that. I needed intense flexibility around, like, look, it's my business. So if I want to close it for 3 days, I can close the business. It's a financial impact, but I could do that. I don't have to ask anybody to do that. And there were times that everything was at all different times of the day, and I needed to do what I needed to do. So
in your transition, what are things that you missed working in corporate, and what are things that you did not miss?
I missed being around the people all the time, and I missed managing a team, and and I definitely missed knowing I'm getting that paycheck every 2 weeks. Right. We all miss that,
and the benefits.
But what I didn't miss is sometimes doing stuff that, like, in my head, I was like, why am I spending time on this? Like, this is not value-added work. It's kind of busy work. So I didn't miss that. I didn't miss not having to explain what was going on in my life. Like, I'm just private around that stuff. So I really didn't want to have to go into that kind of detail. For me, I think now, and I'm sorry, I did want to share this. What I did miss, and I do miss, is something I didn't expect to happen. People definitely will judge you on what you're doing. And so it was the first time in a long time where I wasn't saying I'm a VP of this or I'm a senior director of this. And when I said I was a small business owner, or I was taking a pause, for some people it was almost like it was a disappointment for them that I was doing that. And I'm like, no, you should be happy for me that I've gotten to a point where I can do this and take this break to do something for my family that I need to do. But it was kind of, if you're not that, you're not important. And I think that impacted me a little bit for a second, right? For a blip. And I called you in the car and I'm like, why, this is crazy. Yeah. But then I realized, like, so bad for you that you can't see that this, like, we should all aspire to be able to take that pause if we need to.
Right.
And be able to switch gears if we need to at a time where, your family needs you.
And I think that talks about you being a flexible leader. And it really shows how much of a badass you are. Like, you can say, you know what, I'm giving up this stability to go take care of my family, but no, I'm not resting. I'm starting a business at the same time. So trust me, I'm still growing. I'm still developing.
Right.
I'm just creating my own thing now, which is actually more than what you're doing, because it's harder.
Yeah, it is, and it's hard. And I think, look, we've got to be supportive of each other,
right,
and not make assumptions, because this is where when we talk about inclusion and we talk about biases. It's if you don't go down that straight path, sometimes people will look at you and go, what are you doing? That's wrong. What you're doing is wrong, and it's not. It's the path I have to go down right now, and I don't have to explain that, and you really shouldn't be judging me for that.
Right. Actually, you should be coming to my airbrush studio and getting yourself airbrushed, because it's an experience you don't want to miss.
Yeah, and you should be hiring Victoria, right, to come in and do things at your company. And
right,
one thing I would say is, when you take a pause or you do something different, because we know people that have done it. I mean, there's a couple of friends that have gone off into completely different paths
right,
than what they were doing before. And you want to make sure that you don't think that negates everything they did before. Like, that intellect and that experience and that body of work that they created is still there. They're just deciding to do something else for a period of time. And so you've got to look at that and say, that's going to bring another level and dimension of intelligence and contribution to the table that we didn't have there before.
Exactly.
And so, I'm meeting a lot more people like that I'm like, yeah, you get it, right? Because, we know people that have gone and worked in nonprofit for a while, or have done their own business or done consulting, and then they go back, and it's like, you're bringing a different perspective. You have a little bit more of an appreciation of what it's like to be on the other side of the table.
Absolutely. And in my opinion, you bring more value. Right, if you've gone through that experience, because you've had to focus on resiliency, you've had to focus on time management, project management, you had to really manage 1,000,001 things under the sun, especially if you have a family at the same time. So in my opinion, for me, hiring people, I'll be looking to people like, okay, have you done the same thing for 15 years or have you done something different?
Right.
Because having that ability to reinvent yourself, to me, is more valuable. You'll also be more relatable to a lot more people, and you'll also have that diverse experience and perspective that's going to help us be that much better. So I'm so happy that was like a quick stint, but it's interesting that you bring that up because you're not the first person that has experienced that. I feel like a lot of folks who have spent the majority of their career in corporate and have built this network feel like a fish out of water when they go out and do their own thing because they're just so used to, kind of spinning the wheel in that world, and now it's a completely new world.
Yeah.
And for those who have never been in it, can't understand it. And so, like what a lot of people do, when they see the unknown, they judge because they don't know. Right? And it kind of is like weird because they just don't know and they don't understand it.
You asked me before, what were some of the pluses too. I actually got to know people better over the last years because I was always running like from one thing to the next, and at the time, years ago on a BlackBerry, then on a phone, I'm on a conference call, I'm like running into my kid's school, grabbing the papers, running out on a conference. And so I actually started to talk to people and meet people and like actually have conversations that weren't sound bites. So that was a plus. The other thing is that I got to focus on my health and really, really, kind of take my fitness and health to another level that I've never done in my life because I didn't have the time. So, those things, I've used my time wisely. I think, now I'm, and we've talked about it, I'm kind of dipping my foot back into the corporate world, especially with the work that I'm doing with Alpha and working with a lot of companies on some of their diversity initiatives, because I think there's such a need right now. I think, like, honestly, years ago, I think many of us, especially me, I remember thinking, wow, we've gotten there. Like, we're there. And I don't feel that way so much anymore. And that's an opportunity. There's an opportunity to kind of do this work and make an impact.
Right. And I think that line of thinking around what is my legacy going to be? What is my impact going to be? Where can I have the most value? And having that type of self-awareness is key. And I think pursuing something like entrepreneurship forces you to think about that, because now you have no one to depend on but yourself. So you critically have to think about what's important to me. What do I care about? What makes me happy? What do I want to do 10 years from now? Is it this? Is it something else?
It's all of it.
Exactly. We want to do it all. We want to do it all. So one question I ask all of my guests is, what does collaboration mean to you?
A collective win and not a personal gain. That's what it means to me. Because if you go into collaboration thinking, I'm going to suck the very life out of this person to get what I need out of this, then that's not collaboration. I think everyone can win, if you kind of put that goal on it.
Thank you so much, T. I appreciate
welcome.
your time. Guys, make sure to come to her airbrush studio. It is super cute, and visit her at besodesoltent.com. Also, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I need you guys here supporting. Don't forget to leave your feedback. I will answer all of your questions, and make sure to comment and respond. And stay tuned for the next interview. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Victoria. Follow her. She's great.